Marta lived in a modest white-painted house tucked away at the end of a quiet street in Seguin, Texas. The house nestled between two old oak trees, as silent as the life of the woman who had passed the age of 45. Every morning, she brewed coffee with hands that knew the filter's every movement by heart. Every evening, she stood by the kitchen window, watching sunlight slide slowly across the roof of the chapel, where her husband, Pastor Elijah, preached about forgiveness, compassion, and the Lord. From the outside, their life looked pristine, an exemplary reflection of faith. Elijah was beloved by the community. Tall, gentle, his words like honey, he had a way of touching people's hearts with every verse of Scripture, with eyes that seemed to carry a rare, unwavering peace. Marta, to the congregation, was the picture of a virtuous woman, modest, tender, and always smiling as she stood beside her husband after every Sunday service. But no one saw her when night fell. No one saw the emptiness in her eyes as she lay beside the man who once made her heart tremble with a single touch to her knee during prayer. No one saw the way she turned her back to him quietly, coldly, as if love had died long ago. And perhaps even she no longer remembered the exact moment her heart shut down. Maybe it was after the accident on a drizzly evening, with the sound of screeching brakes stretching out like a cry. Elijah walked away unscathed, but Marta fractured her shoulder and lost partial sensation on the left side of her body. The doctor said it was a minor injury, but no one knew the part of her that was truly hurt lay much deeper, quietly shattered, something broken that couldn't be seen in an X-ray or named in a diagnosis. After the accident, her husband's sermons began to feel distant, like echoes from another world. She still went to church, still smiled at everyone, still sat in the front pew, nodded at the right moments, said amen like a machine following its programming. But inside, Marta was drifting, unseen, unmoored, and without meaning. There were nights she couldn't sleep, sitting alone in the darkness of the living room, hearing only the ticking of the clock and the wind pushing through the old window panes. She would ask herself, is this still my life? Or just the dim, drawn-out shadow of a past that once felt warm? Then one day, the church started offering evening dance classes for middle-aged women as a way to revive the body in the light of the Lord. Elijah encouraged Marta to join. She agreed, not because she wanted to dance, but because she needed a reason to leave behind the cold leather chairs and those suffocatingly silent dinners. What she didn't know was that night, when the music began to rise in that dimly lit wooden hall, her life would never return to what it once was. The dance class was held in the small fellowship hall behind the church, once the space where teenagers practiced hymns, where laughter from Christmas parties still lingered in memory. But that evening, the air felt different. The hanging filament bulbs cast a soft glow, making everything look dreamlike, as if a veil of mist had settled over both memory and reality. Marta walked in. The other women laughed and chatted, tying their hair, adjusting skirts. But Marta stood still, quiet, like the surface of a lake before a storm. She felt something shift, not in the room, but inside her. Like a second heartbeat, moving just beneath the skin, a rhythm unfamiliar to the silence she'd grown used to. And then she saw him. He stood at the back of the room, reattaching a loose speaker wire. A young man, maybe 30 or younger, wearing a dark t-shirt, his arms inked with tattoos Marta didn't dare examine too closely. His hair was long, a little messy, but his eyes, they glowed strangely. Not the glow of innocence, but the fire of someone who had once been burned and survived. Marta didn't know him, but her body seemed to recognize something. Something long buried, waiting to be awakened. And when he turned and met her gaze, just for a fleeting moment, a breath's length, Marta felt a slow heat rise in her chest. As if an old, forgotten artery, sealed shut for years, had suddenly burst open and was flooding her veins. "You're Pastor Elijah's wife, right?" he asked. His voice was low and husky, like wood crackling in a fire. "I'm Noah. I'm helping out with the class." It was a simple sentence, polite, unremarkable. But the way he looked at her, it wasn't with the reverent eyes most people offered Marta. It was something else. Something direct, untamed, and too knowing. She felt stripped not physically, but of her mask. The model wife, suddenly exposed. Seen. Touched in the deepest place, one even Elijah had never reached after all their years together. Noah turned on the music. Latin rhythms filled the room, drawing the women into slow, gentle steps. Marta followed. But each beat seemed to move through her bones, her muscles, stirring parts of her body she thought had long gone numb. And every time she glanced at the corner of the room, where Noah stood with arms folded, leaning against the wall, watching, the way she danced changed. Lighter, softer, as if someone's eyes were holding her every motion. As if a long-forgotten longing was beginning to bloom in the shadows. That night, Marta didn't sleep. She sat by the living room window, moonlight silvering her hands, and wondered, why did my heart race at the sight of a stranger? Why can't I stop thinking about his eyes? And why does it feel like I've come alive again after years of sleep? She didn't know. All she knew was that the next morning, she reached for a softer dress. And when Elijah asked, "How was the class?" she just smiled faintly and said, "It was nothing, really." But inside, something had shifted. Some things can't be named. Like whispers in the wind. Like the feeling of being watched in a crowd. Or that faint, unplaceable light falling on the heart, making it ache, that you're not sure if it's from pain or longing. By the third class, Marta had started lingering longer in the back hallway behind the fellowship hall, where the old ceiling fan creaked, where few people ever passed. She wasn't waiting for anyone, but she wasn't in a rush to leave either. She just stood there, as if, deep down, she wanted to be found. And then Noah came. Always arriving late, his steps unhurried, the faint scent of tobacco on his shirt, his eyes half smiling, half expecting. He didn't say much. He didn't have to. The silence between them was thick, like early morning fog. Enough to hide within. Enough to touch without touching. "You still feeling pain in your shoulder?" Noah asked after a particularly grueling session when Marta winced from a sudden twist. She gave a small nod, still holding her left shoulder, the one that had been injured before, the one Elijah used to gently massage every night. But now, it was just a hollow routine. "I picked up some physical therapy skills during rehab. I could try to help." Marta hesitated. Then she turned her back to him. She didn't know why. She only knew that she did. Was it instinct, or a quiet surrender to a temptation that had already taken root? His hand touched her shoulder. Warm. Steady. Not eager. Not flirtatious. Just the hand of someone who'd been broken, learning how to touch others as if they, too, had shattered once. Marta felt her whole body shiver. Not from pain, but from something that felt too real, too alive, too different from any touch she'd ever known. "Do you know why old pain comes back so easily?" Noah whispered. "Because the body remembers. It remembers every place it was once hurt, and when you touch it, it recoils." He was talking about bones, about her shoulder, but Marta heard it as if he were speaking about her heart. That night, she walked home feeling light on her feet, but with a chest so tight it ached. Elijah was asleep. The room was dark. She lay beside him, but the scent on her shoulder still belonged to someone else. And her hand trembled. In the days that followed, something grew inside her. Not carnal desire, but a longing to feel alive again. Marta caught herself smiling at the memory of his gaze. Her heart beat louder whenever she heard his footsteps enter the hall. She began choosing dresses, not revealing, but softer, more form-fitting. And Noah's eyes seemed to notice everything. Then one evening after class, Noah said, "Pastor Elijah once saved me. He doesn't know it, but because of him, I quit drugs, left my addict friends, and came back to life." Marta stayed silent. Her heart faltered. Suddenly, the story carried a different weight. I owe him everything, Noah continued. But some debts can't be paid with gratitude. Some things you have to touch to understand. He walked away, leaving her alone in the empty room. And for the first time, Marta didn't know which side she was on. Loyalty or true life? And a silent question began to form in her chest, like a single drop of water suspended in the heart. If Elijah once saved him, then what was he here for now? To save her from a slow death? Or to tempt her into reclaiming something she had lost? Their relationship didn't begin with a kiss. Not with a passionate night. Not with a rushed embrace in a dark hallway. No, it began with silence, the kind of silence that has sound. The sound of two souls recognizing each other from afar. No words, yet knowing. No touch, yet burning. Noah didn't rush. Marta didn't fall carelessly. They never named what was happening. They simply let it grow, stretch, like smoke seeping into the cracks of a heart and body long left unspoken to. Evenings at the church hall slowly became a private ritual. Marta arrived earlier, stayed later, folding chairs, cleaning tables, adjusting the sound system. That accidental touches, a fingertip grazing a wrist, a fleeting glance. And every time, Marta's heart beat differently. Not faster, but deeper, quieter, like a drum sounding from beneath the earth. One Thursday evening, it rained. The other women left early. Marta stayed behind to mop the floor where it had gotten slippery. Noah stood by the door, watching her silently as she bent over, her dress damp from the rain, her hair clinging to the nape of her neck, every movement soft as soaked velvet. You know, his voice blended with the sound of rain. There are things I don't even let myself think, because if I do, I won't be able to come back. Marta looked up. Their eyes met. And this time, she didn't look away. She stood. Slowly, took a step toward him, then another, close enough to hear his breath, to feel the heat, to smell skin. Rain. Desire still unspoken, not yet formed. So do I, she whispered. A confession. A surrender. A spark. And they stood there, suspended in a moment thin as a strand of hair, where all old boundaries began to crack. Not a kiss. Not a hug. Just a gaze. Too long. Too deep. And from then on, there was no turning back. After that night, Marta began crafting new reasons to leave the house. She lied gently, skillfully, like someone who had never done it before in 18 years of marriage. Elijah still believed her, still placed a hand on her forehead to pray before she left, his eyes full of the same love as always. And somehow, that made it hurt more. She wasn't a woman who cheated, but now she was. Every Tuesday afternoon, she met Noah behind the abandoned house near the woods. It had once been where the pastor held youth summer camps. Now it was dust-covered, the brick walls crumbling. They didn't need a bed, didn't need candles, didn't need words of love. They only needed life. The burning aliveness of a body too long untouched by a gaze that truly saw what it needed. Noah was a storm, a searing breath, a fire. He touched Marta like she was the final prayer he needed to memorize before he died. And Marta, for the first time in her life, realized she was a woman. Not a wife. Not a mother. Not pastor's wife Marta. But skin, flesh, desire. Something wanted down to the bone. After every time they were together, she cried. Not loudly. Just silent tears soaking into an old pillow in an abandoned house. Noah wiped them away. He didn't ask. He didn't console. He understood. Because what they were entering wasn't love. It was a quiet kind of rebirth. Sinful, but not wrong. Beautiful, but dangerous. And neither of them, not one of them, wanted to stop. When all the doors behind you finally close, you begin to hear a voice from deep inside. And Marta heard hers. Clear, soft, but persistent, like a forbidden hymn. Keep going. Just one more time. Only one more time. But one more time is never just one more time. One touch leads to one look. One look becomes one night. And one night sparks an entire season of wildness. Noah never called, never texted, never begged. But every time she stepped into the church hall, she knew that gaze was waiting for her. Like a smoldering ember behind the crucifix. They were no longer two strangers who had stumbled into each other. Between them now lived a private language, wordless, reasonless, with no exit. Marta began to change. No one said it out loud, but everyone could feel it. Her eyes grew sharper. Her voice lower. Her hair no longer tightly pinned. It fell loose, softly waved, like an unspoken invitation. The women in the dance group began to whisper. A few husbands looked at Marta longer than necessary. And Elijah still believed his wife was as holy as she was on their wedding day. After every sermon, he'd place his hand on her shoulder, smiling with love and trust. God is always within you. But he didn't know on some nights, other hands had rested on that same shoulder. Held it, pulled it down. And it wasn't to pray. Every time Marta stepped out of that abandoned house, she felt like she was living in two parallel worlds. One was Elijah, the pastor, the husband, peace, light, responsibility. The other was Noah, dark, suffocating, wild, a place where rules were crushed between teeth, beneath nails, in muffled moans trapped in the throat. Once, lying on Noah's chest, sweat still drying, Marta whispered, "I think I'm slowly dying at home, but here, I come back to life." Noah said nothing. He just smiled, that smile of someone who stepped over the edge and is now pulling you with him. Guilt began to gnaw at her. Not loud, not violent. Light as smoke, but slipping into every breath. She still attended Sunday service. Still knelt before the altar, lips moving in prayer. But her heart was no longer with God. Every time Elijah preached about forgiveness, purity, marriage as sacred covenant, Marta felt her body tense. Not because she was lying, but because she knew she was losing the ability to feel remorse. And she loved that. Loved the way her instincts came alive. Loved how Noah looked at her as if the entire world had shrunk down to the wet curve of her back under his hands. But at the same time, deep in a corner of her heart, something was beginning to crack. Slowly, irreversibly, Noah was changing. He started asking questions about Elijah, about the house, about how a pastor lived when he wasn't on the pulpit. He often spoke of debts of grace, of salvations people forget they were given. His touch remained gentle, but in his eyes, there was something darker, deeper, as if sex was only part of what he was demanding. Marta felt afraid, but she couldn't stop. She had crossed a threshold that you can't return from without losing something. And some people, once they've stepped out of the light, never want to go back. Betrayal never knocks on the door. It seeps in. Quiet. Steady. Like water from a leaky roof. Not enough to collapse the house, but enough to rot everything inside. And Elijah, the husband, the pastor, the man who wore faith like armor, began to feel cold in his own home. Cold in Marta's gaze. Cold in the evenings she no longer sat beside him. Cold in the half-hearted hugs, the rushed kisses, and the silence after every good night. There were no arguments, no tears. No, you've changed, or we need to talk. But there was emptiness. And emptiness always knows how to stretch itself. Until it swallows every old word of love. Elijah began waking up in the middle of the night. Heart pounding. Sweating. Sometimes he dreamed of Marta. Standing naked on the pulpit, smiling at the entire congregation. Sometimes he'd wake to the sound of water. And find Marta in the bathroom, sitting under the cold shower, eyes wide open, hands trembling. He didn't know if it was from pain, or a pleasure he'd never known. Some days, she laughed more, but never at his jokes. Some nights, her dresses were shorter, but to walk out the door, not into his arms. During every sermon, Elijah felt out of sync. The verses he once knew by heart now rang hollow. He began to look at the young men in church with suspicion. Especially Noah, the one he had once rescued from addiction. Now Noah was clean, strong, disciplined, dangerously handsome. And every time Marta mentioned Thursday night dance class, Elijah felt his heart tighten. An unnamed instinct. I'm off to teach. Might be home a little late. We're getting ready for the Christmas performance. Go ahead and sleep without me. But one night, he didn't sleep first anymore. Elijah quietly stepped out of bed and stood by the window. It was dark, still, bitterly cold. And then he saw it. Noah's car, parked a little down the road from the church, lights off. And Marta's silhouette, emerging from the back door of the church, hair down, coat loose. She didn't kiss him goodbye, but she stopped, touched his cheek. A soft touch, but to Elijah, it was the sharpest blade. He didn't cry, didn't rage, didn't rush out. He simply stepped back, closed the window, sat on the bed, placed a hand on his Bible, and breathed, as if all his faith had left him in a single exhale. As for Marta, inside her, another battle was breaking out. No one noticed, but she was slowly disappearing. Bit by bit. Every time she came back from Noah, a part of her drifted further from herself. Every night lying beside Elijah, turning her back, she felt like a ghost, hovering between two men, between light and shadow, between what she should do and what she wanted. She no longer prayed, no longer looked her husband in the eye, no longer knew who she was. Only that, if this continued, something would collapse. A home, a faith, a man, or herself. You don't wake a man like Elijah with shouting. You don't need to. Just a silence, long and lingering like a church bell echoing through an empty chapel, circling, refusing to fade. A distance between two people who once lay close, now wide enough for questions to slip in. Why does she always turn her back to sleep now? Why doesn't she read the Bible in the morning anymore? Why doesn't she touch my hand before dinner like she used to? These questions didn't leave his lips. They drifted through his mind, light as dust. But it's dust like that eventually makes it hard to breathe. Elijah started to listen, not with his ears, but with instinct. The tiniest signs. The red dress Marta used to wear only on his birthday, now she wore it every Thursday. A new perfume, not sweet like before, but bold, sharp, stirring something primal he thought he'd forgotten. Messages flashing briefly on her phone. No names. Just N. But the gut of a husband, of a pastor, of a man who once pulled others from the brink told him, something isn't clean here. And one night, after a sermon, he said softly to Marta, I think we should take a trip. Just the two of us. Like our honeymoon in Austin. Marta smiled. A crooked, clumsy smile, like she had forgotten how to smile at her husband. I'm busy with dance class. The performance is coming up. I can't leave in the middle. Too reasonable. So reasonable, it became suspicious. That night, Elijah didn't go to bed. He sat in the church library, staring at the rows of Bibles, the faith he had preached his whole life, yet now could not save his own breaking heart. If God tests me with loss, he thought, I have the faith to stand. But if God tests me with betrayal, from the one I love most, then should I forgive? Or should I take off this pastor's robe altogether? The next morning, Elijah woke up early. Earlier than usual. He stood in the kitchen, making coffee, a task Marta used to do. She walked in, startled to see him up. I couldn't sleep, he said, his voice light as breath. I kept dreaming you were somewhere else. Marta gave a faint smile, but it lacked weight, like a mask slipping off, worn wrong. It was just a dream. But Elijah looked at her for a long time, then said, just as gently, I'm not sure I want to wake up anymore. Marta turned away, avoiding that gaze, a gaze of someone who already knows, but isn't saying it yet. And she knew. The suspicion had taken root. Slowly, deeply, and it was about to break the surface like a sin no longer deniable. Guilt doesn't knock. It doesn't need to. It already lives in the house, quiet as wind slipping through a crack in the door, shapeless, scentless, but unmistakably there. Marta began to lose sleep. Not because of what Elijah did, but because of what he didn't do. He didn't ask, didn't speak, didn't accuse, didn't check her phone, didn't follow her, didn't yell. It was that silence that clamped around her throat each night. Does he know? Is it just a hunch? Or has he already forgiven me without even knowing for sure? The silence of a pastor carries more weight than 1,000 words of judgment. Marta was slowly falling, out of sync with herself. She no longer had control over time, misplacing her keys, calling people by the wrong name, dropping her phone 3 times in a single afternoon. And then one day, during dance class, when Nathan lifted her with his strong arms like the trunk of an oak tree, his gaze paused, right at the delicate edge of her collarbone. She felt like crying. Not because of love, but because in that very moment, she knew there was no turning back. Elijah didn't need proof. He only needed time. One Sunday afternoon, he stood in the kitchen, pretending to look for the sugar jar, and glanced out the window. Marta stepped out of Nathan's car. She wore a white dress, hair in a bun, sunglasses on. But Elijah still recognized her. The way she tilted her head when she laughed. The way her hand brushed against the man's arm. No kiss, no hug, nothing overtly wrong. Except everything was wrong. When she walked in the door, he asked gently, "Did you go grocery shopping?" Marta nodded, avoiding his eyes. "Yeah, it's been a while since I made you stew." Elijah smiled. But inside, he felt a cast-iron skillet pressing down on his chest. Because just 4 days ago she had said, "I'm sick of stew. It tastes like a nursing home." Just a small detail. A simple contradiction. But that's how a guilty conscience reveals itself, through the very things it tries to hide. Pressure doesn't have to scream. It only needs to exist, steadily, drop by drop. And with enough time, each drop, like water carving into stone, is enough to hollow out a soul. Marta began to fear Elijah. Not because he would hit her. Not because he would leave. But because she had no idea what he was thinking. At church, Elijah still preached. Still read from the Bible. But now every word about forgiveness, about temptation, about faith, felt like a needle piercing her skin. Let the one who is without sin cast the first stone. Elijah's voice rang like a bronze bell. Marta sat in the second pew, her hands slightly trembling. She didn't cast a stone, but she was the one who should be stoned. And in that moment, Marta understood. It wouldn't be long now. Everything would break apart like a soundless explosion. Some changes can't be put into words. They live deep in the silence, in glances that touch but don't connect, in long pauses that choke the air. Marta knew. She could feel every heavy look Elijah gave her when she entered the room, every deep breath when she turned away. But she didn't know what to do with those feelings. Didn't know how to save a shell of a marriage already splintered from within. In the murky evenings, when the church lights cast a timid glow on their weary faces, Marta stood in front of the mirror, looking into her own eyes. Not as the woman she was yesterday, but as a stranger, playing a dangerous game with fire. Elijah had changed. His sermons became sharper, his gaze more scrutinizing. He was no longer the gentle husband, but a judge in a trial with no end. One night, Marta came home late, Nathan's scent of wine still lingering on her coat. Elijah stood there not asking, not shouting, just looking at her, eyes full of questions, too heavy to speak. Marta felt a sharp ache. Not because she'd been found out, but because of the way Elijah was hiding his pain. Dance class had become her refuge, a place where she could be herself, breathe in freedom. Nathan, with his bright eyes, his ever-steady smile, became the wind that stirred her heart. A fire that both warmed and scorched her. But with every movement, every step across the church floor, Marta felt the crack widen. They were both playing a game neither wanted to lose. And that very game, of secrets, of unspoken lies, had turned them into strangers in their own home. Elijah and Marta, once bound together under God's light, were now lost in a maze with no exit. A maze of silence, suspicion, and blades hidden in clenched hands. Some truths can't stay buried in the dark. They find their way to the surface, carving themselves into the world with undeniable marks. And for Elijah, that truth came without warning. Like lightning slicing through a quiet Sunday morning sky, he came home earlier than usual. The church door had just shut behind him when his phone rang. A message from an unknown number. A photo, blurry under warm yellow light. Marta and Nathan, close, unguarded. In the familiar dance studio, Elijah's world shattered. Each sharp shard pierced his heart, dragging him into a depth of despair. He had never imagined. He didn't yell. He didn't chase after his anger. He just stood there like a stone statue, his eyes fixed on the photo, as if trying to find an explanation in the dead silence. Marta stepped into the house, carrying with her the scent of late afternoon and a heaviness she could no longer hide. Her eyes met Elijah's, and in that moment, without a single word spoken, everything was understood. Elijah asked softly, his voice heavy with the weariness of the soul. "Why? Why did you need something outside of us?" Marta couldn't answer. She just stood there, like a ship stranded in a stormy sea. Not because their love was dead, but because there were cracks too deep inside each of them that only the truth could expose. And in doing so, it made them realize. Sometimes, love is not enough to overcome the betrayal of one's own heart. And in that moment, beneath the roof of the church where they once made their vows, every prayer felt hollow. Because Elijah and Marta had entered a battle where there would be no victor. Words once spoken couldn't be taken back like drops of water sliding down a slab of stone. They left their mark, the wounds widened, burning in the soul like a fire that could not be put out. Marta stood there, surrounded by accusations like sharpened arrows. Elijah's eyes blazed, unable to hide the pain that had turned to rage. "You didn't just lie to me, you betrayed sacred vows. You turned this home into a stage for deceit." His voice thundered like a storm, shaking the very bricks beneath them. But Marta was no longer the timid girl from the past. She fired back, her voice trembling but firm. "You think you know everything? You think life is as simple as black and white." Each word cut like a blade, severing the last threads that bound them. Anger, betrayal, hurt, all of it swirled together, creating a storm that could no longer be stopped. Marta looked at Elijah and saw in his eyes a stranger. Not the husband she once knew, but a man filled with hatred, scarred by wounds she helped inflict. And then, in the chaos, Nathan walked in. His gaze hit like a crashing wave, silent, but tense enough to make the air suffocating. Without a word, he looked at Marta, then Elijah, and turned around and walked out. His footsteps, the sound of the closing door, echoed like a bell tolling an irreversible end. Now, the church was no longer a place of peace. It had become a battlefield of unhealed wounds, of words that pierced the heart. Marta stood there, her heart shattering into 1,000 pieces amid the silent screams of betrayal. Every time Marta and Nathan met, time seemed to slow. It wasn't distance between them, it was the fragile line between temptation and restraint, between desire and sin. Nathan wasn't just a young, wild man. He was a fire that burned through the darkest corners of Marta's soul. A fire that both warmed and destroyed. Marta knew each touch, each glance, was an unforgivable betrayal. But she also knew she couldn't stop. She couldn't stop feeling her heart come alive again. Couldn't ignore the breath of something long lost, the thrill of a life she thought had been buried. And with Nathan, it wasn't just about seduction. He also carried secrets, fragments of a past Elijah had once helped him heal, but had left behind smoldering wounds. Their meetings grew bolder. Secret rendezvous, half-hidden smiles, whispered words in the still of night. But their affair didn't stay between Marta and Nathan. The cracks began to spread. into every corner of their home, into Elijah's sermons, into the eyes of the congregation. Nathan wasn't just a lover. He became a storm, sweeping away every definition of loyalty, faith, and everything once thought to be unshakable. Marta and Nathan weren't just seeking each other. They were dragging everything into a dangerous game. A game without winners. Only the wounded. And questions without answers. As night fell over Texas, the lights in the church no longer felt warm. Only coldness remained. A hollow emptiness that mirrored the void inside Marta's heart. She stood there, among the ruins of shattered promises, the broken pieces of trust and love. Marta knew Elijah wasn't the only one who had been hurt. She, too, had been swept into her own storm. Of choices, mistakes, and things that could never be undone. Elijah avoided her more each day. His eyes were filled with exhaustion, the spark of the past long gone. Each time Marta looked in the mirror, she no longer saw the wife of a respected pastor. She saw a tired woman, torn apart by wounds with no remedy. But perhaps the deepest pain came when she realized what she had sought outside. Those breathless moments with Nathan could never fill the emptiness in her soul. And Nathan, that wild man, had become a stranger too. A ghost of the past she could no longer hold on to. Marta stood there, facing the inescapable consequences, faced with painful choices, to go on living in torment, or to find a new path, no matter how uncertain or difficult it might be. Inside her, a small voice whispered, "Could this be the price for dreams once shattered?" Marta's life was no longer the peaceful, gentle rhythm she once imagined. Each morning she awoke like a lost traveler drifting through an invisible world, a world with no place for once burning dreams. The memories of a quiet chapel, of laughter shared with family, were fading into a blur. In their place, endless voids stretched out, where light only flickered briefly, never enough to warm her soul. Elijah and Marta lived together like strangers. No words, no glances exchanged, only a heavy silence, like a dark curtain drawn over everything. The congregation began to notice. Curious eyes crept between pews, whispers floated through the shadows. The church, once a home, had become an arena of suspicion and quiet turmoil. Marta felt like a ghost wandering her own life, unable to find a way out. She missed Nathan, the passionate moments they shared, but she knew too well that it had all been an illusion, something she could never hold onto. The days passed like torn pages from a book, impossible to piece back together. Marta came to understand that life had changed and no miracle could bring back what had been lost. And in the stillness of the night, she asked herself, is there still a way back, or is this the end of a dream? Some days, Marta felt like she stood on the edge of release. In the chaos of life, there were fleeting moments of calm, like a faint light piercing through the thickest night. But even that peace carried a deep loneliness, a weight pressing down like stones stacked upon her heart. Marta realized that truth is a double-edged sword. It can set us free from lies, but also imprison us in the consequences of our own mistakes. Amid the fragments of the past, she began to understand. Freedom doesn't mean escaping all ties. It means accepting and facing them, no matter how painful. She stood at a crossroads. On one side, release from the darkness of secrets. On the other, the burden of wounds that might never heal. Marta knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but with each step, she discovered a new kind of strength. The strength to forgive herself, to keep moving forward, even with a heart full of cracks. And so, though the burden remained, liberation began to seep into her soul, gently, persistently, like a small ray of light in the night. Time waits for no one, and it does not erase the deepest wounds in Marta's heart. The days slipped by, but the shadows of the past clung to her like a second skin. The church still stood, but it was no longer a sanctuary. It had become the grave of dead dreams and shattered hopes. Elijah, with tired eyes and slumped shoulders, carried within him a collapse that could not be undone. Marta couldn't go back, even if she wanted to. Every wrinkle on her face, every weary sigh marked the days of sorrow, the choices that had altered fate. Between light and darkness, she saw the truth. Some wounds never heal. Some relationships are changed forever. And yet, in that loss, Marta found a part of herself. A woman no longer innocent, but stronger and more awake than ever. The echo of this story isn't an ending, but a journey. A journey of endurance, of rebirth, and of unanswered questions. Love, is it still a guiding flame, or just a dying ember in the human heart? Marta once believed, once dreamed of a love that would last, unmoved by trials. But now she stood among the fragments of trust, asking questions that had no answers. Does true fidelity exist? Or is it just a fragile illusion, easily broken? In Elijah's eyes, she saw pain mixed with disappointment, a betrayal not only of the body, but of the soul. And in her own heart, Marta also heard the echo of betrayal. Not toward her husband, but toward herself. Can love forgive? Can mistakes and secrets be forgotten? Or are they merely scars, permanent traces along the path two people once walked together? That question echoed not only in Marta's mind, but seemed to ripple through every silent gaze in the congregation. Perhaps love is not a simple story, but a complicated symphony. A mix of sweetness and bitterness, trust and betrayal. And so, Marta, Elijah, and everyone around them had to face an undeniable truth. Love is a journey full of unanswered questions, a road that doesn't always offer clear directions. And then, just when everything seemed to have ended, when Marta believed she had finally uncovered all the truths, a ghost from the past appeared. Like a cold wind stirring dying embers, it reignited questions she had never dared ask. Nathan, the wild young man, once Elijah's shadow, was not just a recovering addict saved from ruin, but a man of intentions and secrets. He was not merely a fleeting temptation. He was part of something far more deliberate. Part of something bigger, a complex play in which both Marta and Elijah were merely puppets, unaware of the strings that bound them. In the stillness of late nights, Marta quietly uncovered the clues, anonymous messages, missed calls, furtive glances, and secrets too heavy to share. Nathan hadn't just wanted to tempt Marta. He wanted to take what Elijah once had, and more than that. He wanted to destroy the seemingly solid world of the pastor, reducing everything to ashes as part of a silent, bloodless revenge. Marta stood in the heart of a storm of new truths, feeling like a tiny boat tossed in a raging sea. Could she survive the storm? Or would she be pulled under by a current with no escape? And in that moment, she realized something. This wasn't just her battle, or Elijah's, or Nathan's. It was a battle of secrets, of lies, and of dreams left unfulfilled. The story of Marta, the pastor, and Nathan was never just a simple tale of love or betrayal. It was a symphony of complexity, a chorus of passion, pain, whispers of truth and deception. And only by listening deeply could one begin to understand its rhythm.